Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Wealthy Good Life podcast.
Yeah.
We're going to be tackling, a question that I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about and struggling with, and that is taking on graduate school debt really worth it in the long run?
Yeah, it's a question with some pretty significant financial implications and one that we should definitely take a deep dive into.
For sure. I mean, we always hear that a graduate degree is like the golden ticket to
Yeah.
higher salaries, but is that always the case?
Right.
What does the data actually say?
Well, if we look at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we do see a pretty significant earnings gap between educational levels. So back in 2021, people with a master's degree were making on average $1,574 a week, while those with just a bachelor's degree earned towards $334. So that's almost a $250 difference every week.
Wow. Okay. So, on the surface, it seems like a pretty obvious choice, right? Go
Yeah.
to grad school, get the degree, and then just watch the money roll in.
Right.
But I have a feeling it's not always that simple, is it?
You're right, it's not always that straightforward. The return on investment, or ROI, for a graduate degree can be a little bit murky. One study by Four Year Pap actually analyzed thousands of graduate programs and found that 40% of them had zero net financial value. And in some cases, graduates were actually worse off financially than if they'd just gone straight into the workforce with a bachelor's degree.
Wow, 40%. That's a pretty startling statistic. So almost half of the graduate programs out there might not even lead to a higher salary. So what's going on there? Why is the ROI so hard to predict?
Well, one of the biggest factors is the rising cost of education itself. Tuition and living expenses have been steadily climbing, and that makes it a lot tougher for students to graduate without taking on a huge amount of debt.
That makes sense. I mean, we hear about the rising college costs all the time. But is there anything unique about graduate school loans that make them particularly risky?
Well, one key difference is the way direct PLOS loans are structured for graduate students. Unlike undergrad loans, which have borrowing limits, grad students can actually borrow up to the full cost of attendance. So that means they could be taking out loans to cover not just tuition, but housing, food, books, transportation, the whole shebang.
So essentially, they're allowed to borrow more, and that could lead to even higher debt levels. And I imagine private loans with their higher interest rates just make the problem even worse.
Exactly. It's kind of a recipe for financial stress, especially when you consider that not all graduate degrees guarantee a high-paying job on the other end.
Right.
Professor Thomas G. Plante, who's a psychology professor at Santa Clara University, he's actually seen this firsthand. He's observed that many students in his field end up with crippling debt and jobs that just don't pay enough to justify it.
That's really disheartening to hear. It sounds like they're stuck in this vicious cycle, struggling to pay off loans for a degree that's not really delivering the financial return that they were hoping for.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
College consultant Pierre Huguet has actually noticed a shift away from non-professional graduate degrees in recent years. And he thinks that's partly due to a shrinking academic and research job market. There's less funding available.
So we've painted a pretty sobering picture so far. Is there any hope for aspiring grad students out there? Should they just give up on their dreams?
Not necessarily. While the decision of whether to pursue a graduate degree is a personal one, there are definitely steps you can take to minimize the financial risks involved.
Okay, that's reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about grad school but wants to avoid getting buried in debt?
Well, James Lewis from the National Society of High School Scholars has some really great tips. He stresses the importance of not borrowing more than you actually need. Sounds obvious, right?
All right.
But it can be really easy to get caught up in the excitement of it all and take on more debt than you can realistically handle. It's true. It's like buying a house that's way beyond your means, You don't want to end up house poor, and you certainly don't want to be degree poor either. What else can people do to keep those debt levels in check?
Well, exploring options that can reduce the overall cost is really key. For instance, attending an in-state school often means lower tuition rates, and some schools even offer teaching assistant positions that come with a stipend and tuition remission.
Oh, that's a great point. And don't forget about scholarships and fellowships, which can make a big difference in reducing your overall debt burden.
Absolutely. And before you even start thinking about loans, you should definitely check with your current employer. You might be surprised to learn that they offer tuition assistance programs. Krista Montanino from Champlain College actually points out that most employers can deduct up to $5,250 per year per employee for these programs.
Wow, that's a game changer. Imagine having your employer foot a big chunk of the bill for your graduate degree. It sounds like there are way more options out there than people realize.
There are. And it's important to remember all these figures we're discussing are just averages. Your personal situation is going to be unique.
That's a really important reminder. Before you jump headfirst into a graduate program, you need to take stock of your own personal goals, the potential income in your chosen field, and your overall financial situation.
Exactly. It's all about making informed decisions that are right for your individual circumstances.
And if you're looking for more personalized guidance on how to make smart financial choices, be sure to check out wealthygoodlife.com. We've got tons of resources and tools to help you on your journey to financial well-being.
Now let's get back to that big question. Is graduate school ever a good idea from a purely financial perspective?
Okay, let's unpack that. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, the short answer is yes, it can be a valuable investment, but only if it truly aligns with your career goals and you take concrete steps to minimize that debt.
So it's not like a guaranteed path to riches, but it can be a powerful tool if you use it strategically.
Exactly. And to illustrate this point, let's look at some specific data. Earnest, a company that specializes in student loans, has done some interesting research on potential earnings. They found that someone with a master's degree could earn around $863,720 over 10 years, while someone with a doctorate could potentially earn over $1 million in that same time frame. However, it's important to remember that these are just projections, and specific salary data can vary significantly depending on your field.
Right. A master's in fine arts is probably not going to have the same earning potential as an MBA.
Exactly. That's why thorough research is so crucial. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is a great resource for exploring potential salaries and projected job growth in different fields. It can help you make a more informed decision about whether a particular graduate degree is likely to pay off financially.
So we've talked a lot about the financial aspects of graduate school,
Yeah.
but let's not forget that some people pursue these degrees for reasons that go beyond just boosting their income.
Oh, absolutely. Some people are driven by a thirst for knowledge. They want to explore new interests. They're passionate about a certain field. For them, the personal growth and intellectual stimulation that come with a graduate degree are incredibly valuable.
It's like investing in your mind, expanding your horizons, and pursuing those passions, even if it doesn't immediately lead to a bigger paycheck.
Exactly. And while personal fulfillment is important, it's crucial to weigh those non-financial benefits against the potential financial burden, especially if it means taking on a lot of debt.
You have to ask yourself,
Mm.
are those intangible rewards worth the potential trade-offs?
Now let's talk about some alternative paths to success that don't involve racking up massive student loan debt.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more.
Well, there are fully funded programs where your tuition and living expenses are completely covered through teaching or research assistantships.
Wow, those sound amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Are those programs readily available, or are they super competitive?
They're definitely more common in certain fields like the sciences and humanities, and they tend to be a bit more competitive.
But it's definitely worth looking into. What about fellowships? I've heard those can be a great way to fund graduate studies as well.
Fellowships are another great option. They're merit-based awards that don't have to be repaid and can cover a significant portion of your expenses.
Sounds like free money for school. How do I sign up?
Well, it's not quite that easy. Fellowships are very competitive, and the application process can be pretty rigorous.
But hey, the potential reward is worth the effort, right?
Absolutely. And let's not forget about teaching opportunities. Many universities offer teaching assistantships to graduate students, which can provide a stipend and sometimes even tuition remission.
So you can gain valuable teaching experience while offsetting the cost of your education. That's a win-win.
Exactly. And tuition remission basically means you don't have to pay tuition for those specific courses.
Makes sense. What about work-study programs? Are those an option for grad students?
Work-study is mainly a federal program for undergrads, but some graduate programs may have similar opportunities.
So it's worth checking with the specific programs that you're interested in.
And don't underestimate the power of employer tuition assistance. We talked about this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. Some companies are really willing to invest in their employees' education, and that benefit can significantly reduce your out-of-pocket expenses.
So it's always a good idea to talk to your current or potential employer about their policies.
Now let's talk about scholarships. While a lot of people think of scholarships as being just for undergrads, there are actually plenty available for graduate students as well.
Really? Where can people find these hidden gems?
There are lots of online scholarship databases, and professional organizations often offer scholarships to students in specific fields.
So it's worth doing some research and casting a wide net.
Definitely. And remember, even if you do get financial aid, it's smart to have some savings to cover unexpected expenses.
That's a good point. Life happens, and it's always best to be prepared.
And if you're thinking about taking out loans, make sure you prioritize federal loans over private loans. Federal loans generally have lower interest rates and offer more flexible repayment options like income-driven repayment plans.
That's such an important piece of advice.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot to consider when it comes to student loans.
There is. And finally, don't forget to explore loan refinancing options after you graduate. You might be able to get a lower interest rate and save money over the life of your loan.
That's a great tip. It seems like there are always ways to kind of optimize your financial situation even after you finish school.
Absolutely. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by all these options, remember that wealthygoodlife.com is a fantastic resource for tools and tips to help you navigate the complex world of personal finance.
Yeah, we've got tons of articles, calculators, and even personalized advice to help you make informed decisions about your money.
So don't be a stranger. Come visit us at wealthygoodlife.com.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into graduate school debt. We hope you found it informative and empowering.
Remember, thoughtful planning and informed decision-making can make all the difference when it comes to achieving your financial goals and living that wealthy good life.
Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Good Life podcast.
And before the break, we were talking about some of those alternative paths to funding your graduate education.
Yeah, those fully funded programs and the employer tuition assistance options, those sounded amazing. But I'm also curious about those average debt figures that we talked about earlier. Can we break those down a little bit more?
Sure. According to the Education Data Initiative, the average debt for a master's degree can actually range from around $55,000 for like a post-baccalaureate certificate to over $80,000 for a master's degree from a private, nonprofit institution.
Okay, so that's a pretty wide range.
Yeah.
I guess the type of institution and program that you choose really does make a difference.
It definitely does. And when you look at specific master's degree programs, the debt figures can vary quite a bit as well. So for example, an MBA typically comes with an average debt of around $63,517, while a Master of Education averages around $52,878.
Okay, so even within the world of master's degrees, there's a lot of variation. What about doctorate and professional degree programs? I imagine the debt levels are even higher for those.
You're right. For a PhD, for example, the average debt is around $128,845, while a doctorate in health sciences professions can reach a whopping $241,034.
Wow, that's $250,000 in debt. A law degree or a medical doctorate are much better either, with average debt figures of $119,292 and $202,453, respectively.
It's also important to consider the length of the program. So, a master's program might only take a year or two, while a PhD could take several years. And medical doctorates involve years of residency training on top of that.
That's a great point. The longer you're in school, the more opportunity there is to accumulate debt, especially if you're relying heavily on loans.
Now, circling back to those strategies for minimizing graduate school debt, one of the best ways to avoid borrowing too much is to look into those fully funded programs we mentioned earlier.
Yes, tell me more about how those actually work.
So these programs typically cover your tuition and living expenses through teaching or research assistantships. Basically, you're working for the university in exchange for them funding your education.
That sounds like a fantastic opportunity. Are those programs readily available, or are they like super competitive?
They're definitely more common in certain fields like the sciences and humanities, and they do tend to be more competitive.
But it's definitely worth looking into. What about fellowships? I've heard that those can also be a good way to fund grad school.
Fellowships are another excellent way to fund your education. They're merit-based awards that you don't have to repay, and they can cover a significant portion of your expenses.
It sounds like free money for school. How do I sign up?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Fellowships are highly competitive, and the application process can be pretty tough.
But hey, the potential payoff is worth the effort, right?
Exactly. And don't forget about teaching opportunities. Many universities offer teaching assistantships to graduate students, which can provide a stipend and sometimes even tuition remission.
So you can get valuable teaching experience while also offsetting the cost of your education. It's a win-win.
For sure. And tuition remission just means you basically don't have to pay tuition for those specific courses.
That makes sense. What about work-study programs? Are those something that graduate students can take advantage of?
Work-study is primarily a federal program for undergraduate students with financial need, but some graduate programs might have similar opportunities.
So it's worth checking with the individual programs you're interested in.
And don't underestimate the power of employer tuition assistance. We talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Some companies are really willing to invest in their employees' education, and that benefit can dramatically reduce your out-of-pocket costs.
So it's always a good idea to have a conversation with your current or potential employer about their policies.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about scholarships. A lot of people think of scholarships as being just for undergrads, but there are actually tons of scholarships out there specifically for graduate students.
Oh, really? Where can people find these hidden gems?
There are a lot of online scholarship databases, and professional organizations often offer scholarships to students pursuing specific fields.
So it's worth doing your research and really casting a wide net.
Exactly. And keep in mind, even if you do receive financial aid, it's still a good idea to have some savings set aside to cover any unexpected expenses that might come up.
That's a great point. Life happens, and it's always best to be prepared.
And if you're thinking about taking out loans, be sure to prioritize federal loans over private loans. Federal loans generally have lower interest rates and offer more flexible repayment options, like income-driven repayment plans.
That's such an important piece of advice. It sounds like there are a lot of nuances to navigate when it comes to student loans.
There are. And one last tip. Don't forget to explore loan refinancing options once you graduate. You might be able to snag a lower interest rate and save money over the life of your loan.
That's a great tip. It seems like there are always ways to kind of optimize your financial situation, even after you're done with school.
Exactly. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all of these options, remember that wealthygoodlife.com is a fantastic resource for tools and tips to help you navigate the sometimes confusing world of personal finance.
Yes, we have a ton of articles, calculators, and even personalized advice to help you make informed decisions about your money.
So don't be a stranger. Come visit us at wealthygoodlife.com.
We'll be right back with more on graduate school debt right here on the Wealthy Good Life podcast. Stay tuned. And we're back with the Wealthy Good Life podcast.
We've been talking about whether graduate school debt is really worth it.
And, we've talked a lot about the dollars and cents, the financial aspects of this decision, but I think it's important to remember there's more to it than just the money, right?
Oh, definitely. The value of a graduate degree goes way beyond just potential earnings.
So like the non-monetary benefits, the things that are hard to measure but still super important.
Exactly. A graduate degree can open up new career paths, ones that wouldn't have been available otherwise. It gives you specialized skills and knowledge that can make you a much stronger candidate in the job market.
And let's not forget about the personal satisfaction that comes with hitting a big educational goal. It's about investing in yourself, expanding your knowledge, and pursuing things you're passionate about.
Right. For some people, that sense of personal and professional growth is worth more than money, even if the immediate financial return isn't as big as they hoped.
It's about finding that balance between financial well-being and personal fulfillment.
And it's important to remember that the decision of whether or not to go to grad school is a very personal one. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
It's about weighing your own goals, your circumstances, and your values.
Exactly. And if you do decide to go for it, be proactive in your research. Explore all those options we talked about for minimizing debt and approach the whole thing with a clear head and a healthy dose of realism.
Don't get caught up in the hype or let yourself be pressured by what other people think. Take your time to really understand what it means financially and how that fits with your goals and aspirations.
And remember, there are resources out there to help you navigate this process.
Absolutely. And one of the best resources is our website, wealthygoodlife.com. We have so many articles, tools, and tips to help you make smart financial decisions.
Whether you're thinking about grad school, buying a house, starting a business, or just want to get your finances in order, we can help.
Knowledge is power, and we're here to help you make the best choices for your future.
So come visit us at wealthygoodlife.com.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into graduate school debt. We hope you found it helpful and empowering.
Remember, thoughtful planning and informed decision-making are key to reaching your financial goals and living that wealthy good life.
Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Good Life podcast.